personal information, personhood, which is the idea that there is a person, and protection of intimate relationships, and obviously the information that comes from that. So let's look at how privacy has changed over the years. In the Victorian era, people recognized that both socially and legally there was a very sharp divide between public and private life. Back then, obviously, we didn't have issues of people bugging each other with electronics or anything like that, but they still had issues with eavesdropping. The other thing that they considered a breach of privacy was actually something that we think of as mundane and nothing to think about, and that was gossip. They believed that gossip was actually a very severe breach in privacy because it basically slandered the person's reputation without them being able to protect their reputation. We could ensure that businesses couldn't also gather extreme amounts of information and private information about a person because they didn't really track that sort of stuff, something that was socially acceptable. So how has modern privacy evolved? Obviously with technology we have a lot of differences compared to what we saw in the 1800s. New information processing done by companies is usually done through mass surveillance and through just lots and lots of data gathering. It's obviously led to a lot of less privacy, but hopefully more security. But let's look at the whole life cycle of privacy and within the security issue. So obviously we have a security issue, and in order to protect the information that you're trying to protect or that came from the security issue, you put in more surveillance, more video cameras, more bugs, keyloggers, whatever you want to put in. From there, especially within the workplace, people feel like they have less privacy because they feel like they're always being watched. Obviously, I don't know how many of you actually work in InfoSec and trying to monitor different people's information while on the job. Employees find workarounds around this. So in order for them to get past the proxies and go to Facebook or whatever, they find different workarounds, which brings us back to security issues because it creates holes. So there is definitely a conflict between privacy and security. So we talked a lot about what privacy was, and let's kind of go back and understand what surveillance actually is. And the basic definition is the act of monitoring a person and their behaviors, or monitoring a place and the things inside of that place. The idea of surveillance came from the desire to monitor inmates, and Jeremy Bentham created this idea that would better help jails surveillance monitor their inmates, and this was the idea of the panopticon. Basically, a panopticon, basically when you have a jail that has a panopticon, you have the inmate cells surrounding a guard tower in the middle. And this guard tower has all of these different lights, kind of like how you see in the background picture, and they're bright lights so that the inmates can't see into the tower and actually watch to see if the guards are looking at them. So when the guards are doing their rounds, they would see the inmates misbehave and obviously punish them for that. So and since the inmates couldn't really tell when the guards were making their rounds or whether or not they were being watched at that moment, they began to act in a way where they always felt that they were being watched. So instead of actually always misbehaving, they always had one eye over their shoulder trying to make sure that they were actually okay when they're doing whatever they were doing. Obviously, in modern day technology allows for a lot of surveillance within the workplace, and we see this within our own workplaces as well. And with over-surveillance, this leads to a very hostile work environment where people feel stressed and they feel like they're always being monitored, and they feel like they can't really do their job without having someone always looking at their shoulder. Oh. Mm-hmm. Oh. Thanks. Okay. So as I mentioned, with over-surveillance, it could lead to a very hostile work environment. Employers do background checks, obviously, to go in and see who they're actually hiring and make sure that they're going to be a good fit for the company. They put in a lot of resources and time in training people, and if that person either leaves the company or decides to steal information or whatever from the company, that could lead to a lot of problems. They also worry about the employees jeopardizing their professional image either through their own actions outside of the workplace or through social media. And we'll see later on how that actually plays into the issues that we have with surveillance and privacy. Oops. So everyone's familiar with the game of chicken, correct? Who here doesn't understand or know what chicken is? Okay, so in the regular game of chicken, you have two people going at each other with cars, and the scene that I really remember is the one in Too Fast, Too Furious, where there's the two people coming at the cars and trying to psych each other out to come out and not hit each other. Well, two professors, Robert Sloan and Richard Warner, took this idea of chicken and created a metaphor to explain the power struggle between consumers and companies when dealing with the consumer's personal information and how they distribute that. And when they introduced that metaphor, I thought it was a good metaphor to explain the power struggles that we have within the workplace with employers monitoring employees and employees feeling that their privacy is being breached. And so we see that for and this theory is called the one-sided chicken, where one side has more power over the other. And we see that where the employer is able to set the policies and the rules and how information is going to be used and how it's going to be monitored, and the employee doesn't really have much say in that. They either agree to those terms or they find a different job. And this obviously gives the employer an advantage over this. But if the employee feels that their rights or their privacy has been breached, they do have some ways to get that back, but it's very difficult, which is why surveillance makes this a lot more difficult. Come on. Okay. So how does surveillance factor into this? Obviously, employers monitor their employees, and they monitor their company assets as well to protect against threats. 78% of employees are monitored, either through email. 15% of employers actually monitor the content of email. 12% record or review phone messages that happen between the employees and the people that they work with, and 8% of them actually review voicemail. And even though surveillance can be used pretty effectively in jails, employers find a lot more use of it here within the workplace because, again, they're protecting their assets, they're protecting their ideas, and it sometimes can lead to a very hostile work environment. So when we factor in surveillance, does this become even more of a one-sided chicken problem? And the answer is yes. But employees still have rights and some protections, but we'll see how that isn't all that great. So governments have set forth different laws where they can give obviously the people within their country protection. And when it comes to privacy, there aren't that many specific laws that give privacy as far as, at least that keep up with the different changing technologies. Older laws are still used to help determine how people are going to rule in court on a privacy issue, but it doesn't really do much, especially when we start putting in email and social media and all these different types of communications and technologies. A lot of people think that the Fourth Amendment actually does give you that right of unnecessary search and seizure, but that only happens when law enforcement is involved. It doesn't actually happen within the private sector within a company. Privacy laws are all based on a reasonable expectation of secrecy, and it's very difficult to actually prove that within the court. There are new laws being passed in different states, such as the California Privacy Act and the, they do fill in some holes, but it doesn't really do much. There's still a lot that can be done. So obviously people think that their private life is private once they're out of the workplace. And unfortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. Employers still monitor their social media accounts of their employees. Some of them actually ask their employees to either hand over their passwords or quit the job. It's happening a lot less, but it still comes up. Sometimes employees are fired over social media posts, and that could either happen because they're talking about the workplace conditions in a very negative way that could impact the company's image. And it could be done, and sometimes they're actually just trying to connect with other coworkers to talk about the work conditions and see how they could make it better or unionize. And the National Labor Relations Act actually helps protect employees in that second part, where instead of just bashing the company, the National Labor Relations Act helps employees be protected from employers from stopping any unionization efforts. A lot of companies actually do have bring your own device policies, and that can be problematic when talking about the laws that happen. It's a very gray area, especially since you have a personal device where you're actually doing work-related things on there. And a lot of companies have privacy policies that have the employee put in special software like keyloggers, and they basically give the company the ability to either seize the device or to monitor what kind of information passes through that. Obviously, they do that so that they can keep their assets safe, but if you're going to have to think about how you're going to use your personal device, it really isn't a personal device anymore. And employers do store a lot of private information, and the way that they handle that and how they actually store that can really be up to them. And at least in the U.S., the U.S. gives the employer all of the they give them the right for how long they want to keep the information and how they want to use it. And if they outsource that HR sector or the IT sector, obviously that information is being transmitted to other places, and that could lead to issues and breaches of privacy. The UK and Canada have very strict laws as to how data should be stored, especially when dealing within their country or dealing with their employees. And Canada actually takes it a step further from the UK. The UK gives basic guidelines that the employers can follow. The Canadian laws actually require you to follow a specific rule set where you have to only keep the data for a certain amount of years. Once that information is used, you can't use it anymore, at least in that file, unless you try to do a whole appeal process. And it's very interesting to look at. So how does this all factor into incident response? Obviously, when a company is subpoenaed, they have to give out that information. There isn't any expectation of privacy there. But when the company is the one litigating, they obviously are going to conduct an investigation, which would involve forensics or however they're going to investigate. And if you have that personal device, that bring your own device that we mentioned before, it could, again, that whole legal gray area happens again. Obviously, deleting and destroying data gets you into trouble through the Computer Fraud Act, and probably shouldn't do that, even if it's in an accident, but there is those concerns. So, is there a solution to the privacy and surveillance within the workplace problem? And there could be. If anything, we have to agree on what privacy actually is going to look like for us. Whether it's going to be something like within the Victorian era where it's super, super private and very restrictive, or nowadays where people just want to get rid of privacy altogether. New technology is a problem, but it could also be a solution where instead of having actual people looking at the information and possibly stealing that information, we could have algorithms to help, and with such as IDS devices to help look for events first before we start actually digging into that information and possibly breaching someone's privacy. So thank you guys for listening. I'm sorry about all the technical issues from the beginning, but thank you out for everyone, and I also want to give a special thanks to Johnny Christmas for helping me put all of this stuff together. That. It's okay.
Yep, not a problem. Sure. Lavalier or
What's that?
lavalier or hand mic?
It's one of these. Okay. If you're not sure where you are in track 3. This is Jason Lang, blue to red. What matters and what really doesn't. We'll be getting started quite shortly. And Hack for Kids, the Web Hacking Exposed has been changed to Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. So any of you that are watching your please take note. Thank you.